This is the third episode in a series about consciousness. In the first episode we presented all the myriad of ideas that what consciousness is. In the second episode I presented my own opinions, and in this third episode I'm going to describe some counter-arguments to my opinions which I feel are important to understand, and then look at the conclusions of what happens with consciousness in the future. Now I want to look at two arguments against my conclusions from last week. The first is from an anaesthetist called Stuart Hameroff, who should really know what consciousness is because his job is to put people to sleep and make sure he wakes them up again. Stuart has a convincing argument that the microtubules that are in the brain are the consequence of consciousness. And he has actually shown that some of the anaesthetics that are used effectively shut down the microtubules and cause loss of consciousness. And so that's totally convincing argument. But what he also talks about is his work with Roger Penrose, who I do disagree with. I have a greater respect for Roger Penrose, who is a great physicist and very knowledgeable about quantum mechanics. But I do disagree when he says that a computer cannot computationally create a consciousness. And his argument is that he's proved mathematically that a Turing machine cannot emulate consciousness. The problem is that Turing machines are not adequately model what a modern computer can do. In particular, there's something in computing that we regularly do, which is called iteration. Iteration is where you try something, see how close you are to the answer, try again, and try and move down to what we call a local minimum and get a good answer. Now, that is exactly how machine learning works with neural networks. And it's only logical to think that they're on the right lines, and that's how we'll move up the curve to actually solve the totalness of consciousness and general AI. Now, the other person I wanted to talk to you about is also a doctor. His name is Sam Parnia. He's a doctor that's been involved with heart surgery, and inevitably when you're doing heart surgeries, a certain percentage of your patients actually die or their heart stops, and then later they recover. Now the interesting thing is he's done a study of all the ones that did eventually recover after effectively dying on the operating table but coming back to life due to the work that the doctors did. And he's then quizzed the people of what they perceive to have happened. And often they actually describe hearing what did happen once they died, and seeing this inevitable light and moving towards the light and so on, which people often say. In fact, about 10% of his patients that did die on the operating table and recover reported this sort of event. Now, he does admit that he doesn't know precisely whether or not they've perceived this correctly, because it could be that they had this experience just before they died, or had this experience immediately when they were revived. So it is interesting, and he admits that he doesn't know for sure. But it's a very interesting fact, and it's worth always thinking about. But he does point to the fact that if it is true that effectively consciousness can be separated from the body, and you can view your own body on the operating table, then we're going back to this dualist sort of soul argument that has been around for centuries in religions. Okay, so it's worth pointing out those two cases, because since we don't know in reality yet what consciousness is, and haven't proved my thoughts that a computer can emulate consciousness in the future. It's worth still thinking about the alternative arguments. Right, now let's move on and think about what are the consequences of consciousness and artificial intelligence if I am right and computers can emulate consciousness. So what I said last week was that we can create a computer with artificial general intelligence, at human level intelligence, and then as a consequence of that, consciousness will just fall out. It will just become evident to itself, the artificial general intelligence itself, and to those around it that are observing how it works. Another interesting idea came from David Chalmers, who had the concept of zombies. Now, a zombie, he considers, is a intelligence, an artificial general intelligence, i.e. human level intelligence, but without consciousness. And he then says what zombies don't exist because we've never observed a zombie, and therefore this supports the idea that once you get to artificial general intelligence, you end up with consciousness. Now let's look at the consequences of having human level intelligence and consciousness. Now obviously this has been the subject of science fiction for years, and there are many plays and books and TV series about it. But the consequences of these intelligences having a conscious is they'll start to have rights as humans, basically, and things like murder or being switched off will become an issue. A much better option might be that we merge with these intelligences and they assist us in our thoughts. And this is what the billionaire Elon Musk has created, a company called Neuralink, which is developing a brain-computer interface so that a computer can talk directly to the brain and assist you. This might be a better situation than having separate human-level artificial intelligence. And perhaps what we should do is have our robots and aids being slightly less than human-level artificial intelligence, more like dogs or cats, or perhaps a bit more intelligent than that, but less intelligent than humans. And then having neural interfaces to actually help and aid us in our thoughts and increase our own intelligence and in fact our own consciousness. And one final thought is that as we increase our knowledge about the universe, about physics, about biochemistry, DNA and so on, we're actually increasing our consciousness. This knowledge improves our consciousness, and we become more at one with what nature really is. And with artificial intelligences actually aiding us in our thoughts and giving us more ideas, we ourselves become more conscious and more knowledgeable about answers to questions and so on. So that's it for this week. Please comment below and give me your ideas of what you think about these issues. And like and subscribe to YouTube. And see you next week.